Family, I am so excited about this video today because as you know, if you know me, if you followed this channel, you would know that I am an avid book reader. I love books. I love information, and primarily the reason I read books is to collect and gather information. As a teacher, you have to be a student. You have to be twice the learner than you are the communicator or the teacher. So I brought some books with me. I actually went on a little journey in my own house. I have this little library. My wife built this book set. Yes, my wife built it. Stop judging me. I did not buy it. I cannot do anything with my hands, okay? I can lay hands on the sick. I cannot lay hands on a bookshelf, okay? That's how it works in my family. Anyways, I want to give you for the next few weeks a few books that I would suggest that you buy, you invest in, and you read. And specifically this stack in front of me has directly influenced me in my life. These books have been really influential in my development and in my growth. And so I kind of just want to go one by one through a few of these, give you a little excerpt and a little synopsis on all these books because they've made a huge impact in my faith journey. First book right here is this book, A Tale of Three Kings. I loved this book. Let me make sure you got it in the camera. A Tale of Three Kings. This was written by Gene Edwards. The subtitle is A Study in Brokenness. And primarily what this book was all about was about David, Saul, and Absalom. Now, David was the understudy of King Saul. A lot of the book really highlights and references Saul's insecurities and how Saul was an abusive leader towards David. Now, the really interesting thing about this is this book was so poetic. Like, I don't really read poetic books. I don't really read narratives, to be honest. I read stuff more to collect information. I gather notes. I put it in a file so that I can put it in a sermon later. But this one, to be honest, I read this in 2 days, and I read this at the beach, and this was like emotional for me. If you've ever been under bad leadership, if you've ever had maybe some religiosity or religious teaching in your life, or you've just had poor mentors, leaders, maybe even parents in your life, this book is a must read. I think the response that David has, and actually what we see later is it comes out, some rejection, some bitterness comes out in Absalom's story. They weave these three characters in and out the whole time. David, King Saul, and Absalom. So you got King Saul who came first, David who came second as the king, and Absalom who came as really the insurrectionist in this book. This was an incredible book. You need to buy this book, A Tale of Three Kings. I loved every minute of this read. Did it in 2 days. I recently read this book. This is called The Unsaved Christian. Now, really interesting title, captured my eyes. And I really wanted to dive into this book because, here's the subtitle, Reaching Cultural Christianity with the Gospel. And essentially the entire emphasis of this book is you have to get people lost before they get saved. And he talks about really religious people. He talks about church people. Because here's the reality that I think is so true in the faith journey, is I think we're going to be very shocked and completely surprised at who's in heaven and who's not. I think a lot of people think they're going to heaven just because they attend church. And let me just tell you, based on the understanding of Scripture, Jesus' own words, depart from me, I never knew you. This book addresses that. Cultural Christianity, must read. I think it's so important. This book was so helpful. It's come out a lot of my teachings, a lot of my sermons. And so I would highly, highly recommend The Unsaved Christian. My favorite author, no question about it, Dharius Daniels. If you've been a part of any of my sermons, let me give you the subtitle right here, Represent Jesus. And so it talks about rethink your version of Christianity and become more like Christ. Ultimately, the goal is not so that you can attain more knowledge about Scripture. The goal is that you become Scripture. Or really the personalized personification of Scripture is Jesus. And so he talks about and does a deep dive on the life of Jesus, the words of Jesus, Jesus with submission, Jesus with relationships, Jesus with money. He goes through 12 different chapters of Jesus' life. And so if you want to do a study on the person of Jesus, incredible book by my favorite teacher, my favorite communicator, Dharius Daniels. Highly, highly recommend this. Okay, this book was crazy. Now, here's what's really interesting about embracing obscurity. And if you see this, the book's author is anonymous. It's really interesting to me. The whole book is based out of this study in Philippians where God came down from heaven, down to earth, and he took the likeness of a child, and it's found in Philippians, I believe it's chapter 2 was the whole passage, where he became flesh. And so God, think about this, royalty in heaven, God, divinity came down to humanity, and he didn't become like a king, he became like a child. And he lived 33 years with all of us, mixing it up with chopping it up with all of humanity. And he literally came down and humbled himself to our own likeness. It was crazy. And so this man wrote this book all about, one of the lines I remember he wrote that just stuck out to me is, it's healthy for the soul to be unimportant. Oh, I'll say it again. It's healthy for the soul of humanity to be unimportant at times. In other words, he's saying we are so obsessed with notoriety, with fame, with fortune, with being known. But in Jesus' story, Jesus' life, he modeled this for us. He became literally unknown. He became the smallest of the small. He became a human baby. Divinity became a child. And he shows through the life of Jesus that we need to learn how to embrace obscurity, to be not being known, not being liked. All the follows we're obsessed with, all the likes that we buy. And he just does a deep dive on culture and how all of us want to be so known all the time and how it's a curse, as a matter of fact. And my favorite part about this book, the author is anonymous. This book sold a lot of copies. And so he goes, what good would it be if I wrote this book and I made this huge profit and my name's plastered everywhere, and it could be, he could have made probably millions of dollars off this book, but he chose not to reveal his name. I don't even know who this author is. Now he knows a few friends know who wrote this, but he told very few people in his life, is what it goes on to say in a few chapters here. So he literally practiced what he preached in this, to embrace obscurity. This was such a powerful and impactful book for me. In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day. Mark Batterson, incredible author, incredible writer. I would highly recommend any of his writings. He wrote this book called The Circle Maker. It's all about prayer. He wrote this book called Win the Day. This is his newest book right now. But In a Pit with a Lion on a Snowy Day, this was the first book I ever started and finished in my entire life. This is like, I don't know if you see it, it went through some water. I think I took this to the beach a couple times, so you see it's all waterlogged and it doesn't look very good. But literally, first book I ever read, and I couldn't put this thing down. I was probably in high school when I read it. This was the first faith book I ever read, but it was the first book I ever read recreationally, and I finished. And it goes on a deep dive on a case study on the man named Benaiah, one of David's mighty men, where Benaiah sees this lion, and it's in a pit on a snowy day. And so Benaiah doesn't run away from the lion. Again, in a pit on a snowy day, so terrain is crazy. The lion is literally away from Benaiah. But Benaiah decides he's going to go into the pit with a lion on a snowy day. And it talks all about risk. It talks about adventure. It talks about facing your fears and chasing the roar. This book was incredible. I think it really helped me in my development of getting rid of fear, what the Christian life is really supposed to be like. It's not supposed to be boring. It's actually supposed to be adventurous. And this book, I couldn't put it down. Had a huge impact on my faith journey as a young man. So highly recommend this. Okay. Now, John Bevere, incredible author. You need this book. If there is one book that has taught me principles, really the principle of submission, this book changed my life, and probably the most convicting book I have ever read in my Christian journey was the book Undercover. Now, a few of my friends have read this book. We've given this as curriculum for our church. Undercover is a book all about the word submission to authority. How do you handle poor leadership? How do you handle great leadership? What are you supposed to do in moments where you disagree? It just talks about all these different things. Matter of fact, in this revealing message, discover how true biblical submission differs from obedience. So submission and obedience really speaks to attitude, not just obedience. How to avoid being entirely right, yet somehow wrong. This will teach you how to respond and overcome unfair treatment. The reason God established authority, even though authority has been abused. This book was incredible. You need to buy this book, especially if you're a young leader, to understand how God has ordained authority in our lives. Amazing book. So this book is 10 qualities that move you from a believer to a disciple. Now, this author makes a distinction that there's a difference between somebody who's a believer who believes in Jesus and somebody who is a disciple of Jesus. and he gives 10 distinctives of all these different cases as to what a real disciple is as opposed to what a believer is. Awesome book, super practical, very helpful, even establishes some behaviors and some habits. If you want to be a great follower of Jesus, a great, as he puts it, disciple, highly recommend this book. And last but not least, my wife ripped off the cover. So if you buy this book, this is not going to look like this. So on camera, all it looks like is just a lime green book. I'm pretty sure it has a white cover. This is a book called Searching the Scriptures by Chuck Swindoll. Now, I am a Bible teacher. In the future, I'm going to do a video on a few study tools that you need. I think what Christian young leaders need. But this book was so key into my development into the study of the Scriptures. So Searching the Scriptures by Chuck Swindoll. He is a reputable communicator, a reputable teacher. I would highly recommend this book. He gives these 4 different application points. He talks about how you study the Scriptures is 4 different things: observation, interpretation, correlation, application. This book was awesome when it comes to searching the Scriptures. I loved it so much. One of the key things he taught me in this book that I'll pull and I use in my sermons all the time is God will never lend his truths to the lazy mind. I'll never forget that. This book taught me that years ago. God will never lend his truths to the lazy mind, which is why you have to search the Scriptures. He uses food as an analogy, that the Scriptures are just like, it's just like a pantry. You just have to open it up. You have to feast on it. You read Scriptures with all 5 of your senses, not just with your eyes, but you have to observe. He uses this story about Sherlock Holmes. He goes, I remember he goes, Sherlock Holmes is talking to Watson, and he goes, Watson, you see, but you do not observe. I just remember that. He always read that. And you got to learn how to observe the Scriptures, see what's inside of the Scriptures, interpret them properly, correlate them to other Scriptures, because Scripture interprets Scripture. This book was just amazing for my faith journey. Highly recommend Searching the Scriptures, Charles Swindoll. Hey, listen, I will link all these books in the description below. You can probably find them on Amazon or Google or maybe a Christian bookstore. But I hope this video helped. I hope these links will help you. These were so influential in my faith journey. And I know there's a lot of people out there that really want to take God seriously. And like this book said right here, they don't just want to be a believer. They actually want to be a disciple. And so I would recommend all these books. There's so many more that have influenced me over the years. I just picked out, I believe, 7 or 8 of them that really made a big impact on me. If this video helps, would you send it to a couple people? And as always, hey, like and subscribe. We're a young channel. We're a new channel. We're really looking to get our content out there. If you like it, it helps the algorithm. But we'll bring more content like this really soon. Thank you guys so much. We love you.